My 12 brothers treated me like a piece of meat to prove who was strongest. When my dying father announced, "The farm will belong to whoever shows the most brutality," I understood that my only escape was to destroy everything they desired most, including themselves. Introduction. Oh, my dears, how wonderful that you've come to visit me today. You know, I'm always so happy when you drop by my little home. I'm Iris Wallace, 78 years well lived, born in Clayton County, Georgia, but now I live here in Blue Ridge, in the mountains of North Georgia. A peaceful little town where I found the tranquility I searched for my whole life. These days, my greatest joy is tending to my medicinal garden. I have more than 30 different herbs and plants that I cultivate with all my love. You know, some folks think plants are just plants, but each one has its own temperament, its own needs. Some need more water, others more sun. Some grow better in the shade. I know each of them as if they were my own children. I started this garden almost 20 years ago when I moved here. It was a neighbor, Miss Eleanor, who gave me my first seedlings. Bless her heart, she's passed on now, but she left this gift that transformed my life. In the beginning, it was just a small corner with mint, rosemary, and basil. Today, I even have plants that came from far away, brought by friends, or that I ordered from other places. I'm sitting here on my wooden porch, looking at my garden while I chat with you. The afternoon is cool. The sky has that blue you only get in the mountains of Georgia. From here, I can see the mountains in the distance and smell my herbs mixed with the coffee I just brewed in my percolator. Is there anything better? And you know what makes me happiest? Sharing my stories with you. So if you're enjoying listening to me, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. You hear? It helps this old lady to keep telling her stories. And you, my loves who are watching me now, tell me in the comments, from which corner of America are you watching me? And at what time of your day did you find this chatty grandma's video? Are you having your morning coffee, resting after lunch, or getting ready for bed? I read all the comments, you know. It does my heart good to know there are people from all over listening to my stories. Today, I'm going to tell you a story I've kept in my heart for a long time. It's not easy to talk about, but I think the time has come. It's about family, about power, and about how greed can transform people. It's about my life on a farm in rural Georgia, about my 12 brothers, and about a father who thought strength was the only thing that mattered in the world. Have you ever heard that saying, never get involved in family fights? Well, what happens when your own family becomes your worst nightmare? When those who should protect you are the ones who hurt you most? This is my story, and it begins on a large farm, isolated from everything and everyone, where the law was dictated by one man alone. Childhood and family background. I was born in 1947 on a large farm several miles from the town of Clayton. Back then, everything was more difficult, more isolated. Our property was almost a world apart, with wheat fields that seemed endless, beef cattle, orchards, and even a small distillery that my father, Harrison Wallace, ran with an iron fist. My father was the son of a Scottish immigrant who came to America and married a German woman from the mountains. A tall man with red hair that whitened with time, but his blue eyes never lost that cold, calculating gleam. When he entered a room, the air grew heavier, everyone tensed up. He was proud of what he'd built, said he raised it all with the strength of his arm and his will. And he believed a man was worth the strength he had, not just physical strength, but especially the strength to bend others to his will. My mother, Helen, was the opposite. Small, with black hair always in a tight bun, brown eyes that seemed to apologize for existing. A woman who spoke softly, who moved as if wanting to occupy the least space possible. She came from a traditional German family from the mountains, and the marriage was arranged when she was just 16. By 18, she had given birth to her first son, and after that, it was as if her life was just about bearing children and obeying. Our house was large, a wooden 2-story building with a wraparound porch, painted white with green trim. From the outside, it looked like a life-sized dollhouse, like those that appear on postcards. Inside, it was a silent battleground. The rooms were divided, my older brothers on one side, the younger ones on another, and I, the only girl, had a small room next to my parents, to keep an eye on, as my father said. But today I understand it was so I'd never have a moment of privacy or freedom. Oh, my brothers. We were 13 children in all, me the youngest and only girl. The oldest were grown men when I was born. Elijah, the firstborn, was 24 years old when I came into the world. He was tall like my father, but quiet, observant. Then came Gabriel, the same age, Elijah's identical twin, but with a scar on his chin that differentiated them, the result of a fight with his brother in childhood. Frederick was the third, at 22, the most studious, always with a book under his arm, but no less hard than the others. Owen, at 20, was known for his brute strength. He could carry a calf on his back without breaking a sweat. Kenneth, at 19, was closest to my father, always following in his footsteps, wanting his approval. Then came the middle ones, Henry and Daniel, at 17 and 16, always together in mischief and cruelty. They were the ones who tended the cattle, waking before sunrise. George, at 15, was the only one who showed any kindness, sometimes bringing me a piece of fruit or candy in secret. Harold, at 13, already showed the same coldness as father, with a special taste for mistreating the farm animals. The youngest were Matthew, at 10, Kevin, at 8, and Luke, at just 6 when I was born. These were still being molded by my father's system, still had some innocence, but would soon learn the toughness expected of them. I was born when my mother was already 42, a surprise no one expected. A last-minute disappointment, as my father made a point of saying. A girl, after 12 strong boys. For him, I was proof that my mother was weakening with age. In our house, the worst insult anyone could receive was to be compared to a woman. My childhood on the farm followed the rhythm of the seasons. In summer, we woke with the sun, around 5 in the morning. My mother was already in the kitchen before that, preparing breakfast for everyone. Homemade cornbread, sausage, eggs, strong coffee. Meals were silent. You only heard the sound of silverware and, occasionally, my father giving orders for the day. The girls in the region went to the local school, but not me. My father said that women don't need schooling, they need to learn to work. So, while my younger brothers went to the county school, I stayed at home, helping my mother in the kitchen, in the garden, with cleaning. I learned early to work with plants. My mother knew all the medicinal herbs in the region and taught me everything about them. It was our little secret world, something the men of the house weren't interested in controlling. On Sundays, we went to the Baptist church in town. It was the only time of the week we left the farm. My father made a point of showing the community his exemplary family, all well-dressed, clean, well-behaved. People respected him, or rather, feared him. He was one of the most prosperous farmers in the region, employed many people, made donations to the church. Nobody dared question him. At church, I observed the other girls, with their braids and colorful dresses, playing together after the service. I wanted to join them, but my father wouldn't allow it. Wallaces don't mix, he would say. We'd go straight back to the farm, where Sunday lunch was a little more plentiful than usual, with barbecue and dessert. As I grew older, I began to notice something strange in the dynamic between my brothers. It wasn't just normal rivalry between boys. It was something deeper, more calculated. My father encouraged this. At meals, he would ask what each had done worthy that day. Those who had nothing to show were humiliated. Those who showed results received a brief nod of approval, the most affection he ever showed. By 6 years old, I already knew my place in that house. I was invisible, except when they needed someone to blame for something. Woman's doing, my father would say when something went wrong. If the bread didn't rise properly, if a chicken died, if the weather changed unexpectedly, everything could be blamed on the female weakness that my mother and I represented. I remember once, when I was about 8, I took one of the kitchen knives and went to the field, determined to help with the harvest like my brothers. I wanted to show that I was strong too, that I could work too. Frederick saw me and yanked the knife from my hand with such force that I cut my finger. "A woman with a knife only serves to cut herself," he said, laughing. I went back to the house crying, and my mother treated the wound in silence, only whispering, "Learn your place, girl, or they'll break you." It was around that age that I began to notice changes on the farm. My father was aging, becoming more irritable, more impatient. The farm business was doing well, but he seemed dissatisfied with his sons. None of them was worthy enough to take over his legacy. That's when he began to pit brothers against each other, as if testing who would be the strongest, the most determined, the most like him. The competition begins. It was in the spring of my 12th year that everything really began to change. I remember the wheat fields were starting to turn golden, and the orchards were heavy with green apples still. The smell of damp earth came through the windows every morning after the night rain. It was 1959, and the world outside was changing, but our farm seemed frozen in time, stuck in the traditions my father valued so much. That morning, I woke to shouting. It wasn't unusual to hear my father yelling at someone, but this time it was different. His voice was weak, broken by a dry cough that seemed to tear his chest. I got up quickly, and still in my nightgown, went to the hallway. I saw my mother running to their room, carrying a basin of water. The heavy footsteps of my older brothers echoed across the wooden floor. "Pa's dying," whispered Luke, now 18, as he passed me in the hallway. There was no sadness in his voice, just statement of fact. In the days that followed, we discovered that my father had a problem with his lungs. The county doctor, Dr. Mitchell, an old man with trembling hands, came to the farm every day. "It's serious," he would tell my older brothers, thinking I couldn't hear from the half-open door. "A matter of months, maybe a year if he's lucky." I thought the illness might soften my father's heart, that perhaps, facing death, he might find some hidden kindness within himself. How wrong I was. The disease only made him more bitter, more determined to leave his mark even after departing. One Sunday afternoon, after church, he summoned all his sons to his room. We were all there, standing around the large dark wooden bed where he lay, pale, but with his blue eyes still shining with that same coldness. I stood in the corner, near the door, almost hidden behind George, who was now 27 and almost as tall as Elijah. "I'm dying," my father announced without preamble, his voice hoarse. "But before I go, I'll decide the future of this land." Everyone was silent. The Wallace farm was one of the largest in the region, worth a fortune. My brothers' eyes gleamed with greed. Each of them already had plans for when they inherited their share. "This farm will not be divided," continued my father, causing a surprised murmur among my brothers. "A divided empire is a weakened empire. Only one of you will get everything." The tension in the room became palpable. My mother, seated in a chair beside the bed, lowered her head even more, as if wanting to disappear. "How will you decide, Pa?" asked Kenneth, always the most direct. My father coughed, a harsh sound that seemed to tear something from inside him. When he recovered, there was a cruel smile on his lips. "I'll observe, I'll see which of you is worthy of my name, of my legacy. Which is the strongest, not just in body, but in will. Which of you has the strength to command, to dominate?" His eyes scanned the face of each of my brothers, completely ignoring me, as if I weren't even there. "And how do we prove that, Pa?" asked Elijah, at 36 the oldest and for many the natural candidate for succession. My father straightened in bed, leaning on the pillows that my mother silently adjusted. "Life is a competition. The strong win, the weak perish. Show me who is strong enough to be a true Wallace." Those words hung in the heavy air of the room. Nobody asked anything more. Everyone understood what our father wanted. A competition, a contest for his favor, for the inheritance. A war between brothers. As we left the room, I saw the looks my brothers exchanged. They were no longer just brothers. They were rivals, competitors, and in that family, competition meant cruelty. The next morning, the atmosphere on the farm had changed. At breakfast, the usual silence was replaced by a cutting tension. My brothers observed each other, calculating, evaluating. Elijah, as the firstborn, naturally assumed leadership in managing the farm, giving orders, organizing the work. But Gabriel, his twin, began to question every decision, to propose alternatives, to undermine his authority. "If we divide the cattle into 2 herds, we can experiment with different breeding techniques," suggested Gabriel during lunch, challenging the traditional method that Elijah defended. "That's nonsense," retorted Elijah. "We'll continue as we've always done. Our cattle are the best in the region for a reason." The discussion grew. Voices were raised. Suddenly, Gabriel hit the table with his fist, making the plates tremble. "You always think you know everything, just because you were born 15 minutes before me." Elijah stood up, his eyes flashing. "I know more because I've learned more. While you were out there, wasting time with the girls in town, I was here, learning from Pa." That's when Kenneth intervened, with that calm voice that hid a fierce ambition. "Maybe Pa wants to see new ideas. After all, always doing things the same way doesn't show strength, it shows fear of change." The other brothers began to take sides, some supporting Elijah, others Gabriel or Kenneth. What started as a discussion about cattle management transformed into a battle for power. From his room, my father heard everything. Later, I learned from my mother that he smiled while listening to his sons fighting. The following weeks were a growing nightmare. The competition spread to all aspects of life on the farm. Daniel and Henry, who were once inseparable, now competed to see who could milk more cows, who produced more milk, who sold for a better price in town. Owen used his brute strength to intimidate his younger brothers, especially Matthew and Kevin, who were still trying to find their place in the new dynamic. Frederick, always the most calculating, began to keep detailed notes on each brother's performance, as if compiling evidence to present to father. Harold, with his natural cruelty, found new ways to sabotage others' work, leaving gates open by accident, mixing seeds, hiding tools. In the midst of this chaos, I tried to become invisible. I continued helping my mother in the kitchen, cleaning, caring for my sick father. But soon I realized I had become something more in the sick equation created by my father, a measuring instrument. It all started on a hot January afternoon. I was in the back garden, gathering herbs for my mother, when I felt a shadow over me. It was Owen, with his bulk blocking the sun. He was looking at me in a strange, evaluating way. "What is it?" I asked, uncomfortable with that look. "Nothing," he answered, but didn't leave. He stayed there, watching me. Suddenly, he grabbed my arm forcefully. "Come with me." "Let me go, Owen. You're hurting me." He ignored my protests and dragged me to the barn. Inside was Harold, sitting on a bale of hay, sharpening a knife. "Brought the girl," announced Owen, pushing me forward. Harold looked up from the knife, his black eyes studying me as if I were an animal to be slaughtered. "What for?" "To show who's in charge. Pa's watching. He wants to see who has the guts, who knows how to keep order." Harold smiled, a smile that froze my soul. "And you think mistreating a girl will impress Pa?" Owen shrugged. "Not just any girl, a Wallace. And if she's weak, she needs to learn her place." That's when I understood. I had become part of the test, part of the competition. Whoever could dominate me, show power over me, would earn points in my father's eyes. "You can't hurt me," I tried to say, my voice trembling. "Ma will tell Pa." Harold laughed. "Ma? The one who never raises her voice? The one who bows her head to everything? You really think she'll go against us?" He was right, and that hurt more than any physical threat. My mother wouldn't protect me. She couldn't. She herself lived under the same regime of fear. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to buy time, looking for a way out. "We want you to understand how things work now," said Owen, crossing his arms. Only the strongest will inherit everything. And to be the strongest, we need to show that we control everything and everyone on this farm. That day, they didn't hurt me physically. They just scared me, threatened me, showed the power they had over me. They made me clean the entire barn under their gaze, throwing extra tasks at me, criticizing every movement. It was a demonstration, a warning of what was to come. When they finally let me go, I ran to the kitchen where my mother was preparing dinner. She saw my pale face, my trembling hands. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Owen and Harold, they made me clean the barn. They kept threatening me." My mother sighed, her eyes filling with tears that she quickly wiped on her sleeve. "It's going to get worse," she whispered. "Your father, he did this on purpose." "Did what?" "He knew they would use you like this. It's part of his test." I looked at my mother, incredulous. "Pa wants them to mistreat me?" She didn't answer with words, but her look said everything. At that moment, something inside me changed. The frightened girl began to give way to something colder, more calculating. If I was part of the game, maybe I could learn the rules. And maybe, just maybe, find a way to turn it against the players. The plan forms. In the weeks that followed that afternoon in the barn, I realized my life had changed forever. What started with Owen and Harold soon spread to all my brothers. It was as if I had become a walking trophy, proof of strength to be displayed to our dying father. I remember one morning when I was in the kitchen helping my mother prepare breakfast. Elijah came in with that authoritarian manner of his, looked around and pointed at me. "Iris, you're going to clean my office today. I want everything spotless." Before I could answer, Gabriel appeared at the door. They were still identical at 36, except for the scar on Gabriel's chin and the deeper worry lines around Elijah's eyes. "The girl is coming with me today," said Gabriel. "I need help with the accounting books." The two stared at each other, and the air between them seemed electrified with hostility. "I spoke first," insisted Elijah, taking a step forward. "So what?" retorted Gabriel. "She's my sister too, and my books are more important than your dusty office." I stood there between the two, looking at my mother for help. But she just continued stirring the grits on the wood stove, as if she wasn't hearing anything. "Let's settle this like men," suggested Elijah, rolling up his sleeves. Gabriel smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "As you wish, brother." They went out to the yard, and we all knew what was going to happen. A fight like so many others that were occurring on the farm since our father's announcement. Fights to establish dominance, hierarchy, to show who was stronger. Kenneth, who was sitting at the table drinking coffee, shook his head. "Idiots. That's not how you win this competition." "And how do you win?" I asked, unable to contain myself. He looked at me, surprised that I had spoken directly to him. "By using your head, not your fists. Pa wants someone who knows how to dominate, not just hit." That same day, in the afternoon, Kenneth called me to the grain store. He was separating seeds for the next planting. "You're going to help me," he said, not as a request, but as an order. "And you're going to learn how to really manage a farm." For 3 hours, he taught me about the different qualities of seeds, the best planting periods, how to calculate costs and profits. It was the kind of knowledge he would never share with his brothers. It was his advantage in the competition. But with me, he shared, because I wasn't a threat. I was just a tool to show his leadership ability, to teach, to dominate in a different way. "Did you understand everything?" he asked at the end, his penetrating gaze fixed on me. "Yes," I answered, although my head was spinning with so much information. "Good. Tomorrow I'm going to test you. And if you make a mistake, there will be consequences." The threat was clear, even if veiled. Each of my brothers had his method. Elijah and Gabriel used physical force, competing to see who could give me more orders, make me work more. Frederick used intellectual humiliation, asking questions that he knew I couldn't answer, then laughing at my ignorance. Owen simply used his size to intimidate me, standing very close, cornering me in corners of the house. Henry and Daniel, who previously at least ignored me, now invented impossible tasks, carrying buckets of water that were too heavy, cleaning huge stables in record time. When I inevitably failed, they informed my father of my incompetence. Harold was the worst. He had a sadistic pleasure in scaring me. He would hide and jump out in front of me when I least expected it. He put spiders on my pillow. Once, he locked me in the dark cellar for hours, telling everyone he didn't know where I was. George was the only one who still showed some humanity, but even he had changed. Sometimes he brought me a piece of candy or a hidden fruit, but always when no one was looking. In public, he had to show the same hardness as the others, or he would be seen as weak. The youngest, Matthew, Kevin, and Luke, watched me and learned from the older ones. They were also in the competition, although they had less chance because they were younger. But that only made them more determined to prove their worth. One night, when everyone was sleeping, I got up to drink water and found Luke in the kitchen. He was 18 now, becoming a man. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with a sudden idea. "Iris," he whispered, "come with me." I hesitated, but he grabbed my wrist and pulled me outside, into the dark yard. The moon was full, casting a silver light over the farm courtyard. "What do you want?" I asked, my heart racing with fear. "I want you to help me impress Pa," he said, his voice strangely excited. "I had an idea." "What idea?" "I'm going to take one of Elijah's horses, that chestnut that he doesn't let anyone ride. I'm going to tame it and show Pa that I can control what even Elijah can't control." I looked at him, perplexed. "You're crazy? That horse is dangerous, and Elijah will kill you if he finds out." Luke smiled, a smile that reminded me too much of our fathers. "Only if he discovers." "And you're not going to tell, are you?" The threat was implicit in his voice. If I told, I would suffer the consequences. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're going to help me. You're going to distract George, who's on watch in the stable. Tell him you need help in the house, that Ma is calling, anything." I swallowed hard. If I helped and something went wrong, I would be guilty. If I refused, Luke would find a way to punish me. "I can't," I finally said. "It's too dangerous." "You could get hurt." His face changed instantly, the excitement giving way to anger. "You don't have a choice. Either you help me, or tomorrow I tell Harold that it was you who ruined his trap last week." It hadn't been me, but that didn't matter. Harold would believe Luke, not me. And Harold was the one who terrified me most. That night, I did what Luke asked. I went to the stable, made up a story for George, who left to check. Luke managed to get the chestnut out, but didn't get far. The horse was indeed untamable, and in the darkness of night, it reared and threw my brother off. It wasn't a serious fall, but enough to wake Elijah, who came running to see what was happening. The punishment was immediate. Elijah beat Luke right there in the yard, under the moonlight. I watched from my bedroom window, trembling. When he finished with Luke, Elijah looked at the house, directly at my window, as if he knew I was watching. His look clearly said, "You're next." The next morning, Elijah found me in the garden. He didn't say anything, just grabbed me by the arm and dragged me to the tool shed. There, he pushed me against the wall. "You helped Luke last night," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "He forced me," I tried to explain, tears already streaming down my face. "I don't care. You disobeyed. You chose a side. The wrong side." He raised his hand, and I closed my eyes, expecting the blow. But he stopped midway. "No," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Not like this." I opened my eyes, confused. Elijah was studying me with a calculating look. "Pa is watching," he said. "He wants to see how we handle disobedience. Hitting you would be too easy, too predictable. I need to be more creative." The punishment came in the form of isolation. Elijah convinced all the brothers to completely ignore me. For 2 weeks, No one in the house spoke to me, except my mother, and even she, only when we were alone. It was as if I had become a ghost, invisible, untouchable, non-existent. Those 2 weeks were worse than any physical aggression. The loneliness, the silence, the feeling of not existing. It was perfect psychological torture, and it worked. By the end of the 2 weeks, I was desperate for any human contact, ready to obey any order just so they would speak to me again. That's when Elijah came to me as I silently swept the porch. "Have you learned your lesson?" he asked, his voice cold. I nodded, unable to speak. "Good. Now you're going to help me win this competition. You'll be my eyes and ears. You'll tell me everything our brothers do or say when I'm absent." I looked at him surprised. "You want me to spy for you?" "Exactly. And if you're loyal to me, I'll protect you from the others. If you betray me..." He left the threat hanging, but his look completed the sentence. That same day, Frederick approached me in the barn with a similar proposal. And the next day, it was Kenneth. In a week, all my older brothers wanted me to be their particular spy. I found myself at the center of a web of lies and manipulations. Each brother thought I was on his side, informing only him. In reality, I told each one exactly what they wanted to hear. Some truths, some carefully constructed lies. I learned to manipulate information, to plant seeds of distrust between them. It was a form of survival, but also a form of power. The only power I had in that impossible situation. And as I watched them fighting among themselves, suspecting each other because of my stories, something grew inside me. It wasn't just fear or survival. It was something colder, more calculated. It was the beginning of a plan. The plan unfolds. The summer of 1960 arrived with a suffocating heat that seemed to reflect the atmosphere on the farm. I had just turned 13. There was no celebration, of course. My father's illness was advancing slowly, giving him enough time to watch the macabre spectacle he had created. The competition between my brothers reached new levels of cruelty each day. That January morning, the sun had barely risen when I heard shouts coming from the stable. I ran to the window and saw Frederick and Owen in a violent fight. Blood was flowing from Frederick's nose, while Owen, with his brute strength, pushed him against the barn wall. Kenneth and Elijah watched from a distance, without interfering. Nobody interfered in fights anymore. They were part of the test, part of the natural selection my father had implemented. I went downstairs to help my mother with breakfast, as always. She was thinner, paler. The deep circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights, of constant worry. "They're going to kill each other," I whispered to her as I cut the bread. "It's what your father wants," she replied, her voice so low I could barely hear. "Only the strongest survives. It's always been that way in this family." That same day, at dusk, something happened that changed everything for me. I was in the orchard, picking apples for the pie my mother wanted to make for dinner. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the wheat fields in the distance. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget where I was, who I was, and just admire the beauty of the land. That's when Harold appeared, silent as a predator. I didn't see him approach until he was right beside me. "Found you," he said, with that smile that gave me chills. I tried to appear calm. "I'm just picking apples for Ma." "No, you're not," he replied, taking the basket from my hands and dropping the apples on the ground. "You're wasting time, and time is something we don't have anymore." There was something different in his eyes, something beyond the usual cruelty. There was urgency, desperation. "What do you mean?" He looked around, making sure we were alone. "The doctor was here today. Pa is worse. He won't last until the end of the month." My heart raced. The end was near, and there was still no clear winner in my father's sick competition. "And?" I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "And that we need to speed things up," Harold replied, taking a step toward me. "I'm tired of playing games. It's time to show Pa who really deserves this farm. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm forcefully, pulling me behind the trees, away from the view of the house. Fear froze my blood. "What are you doing? Let me go!" "You're going to help me," he said, his voice cold as steel. "You're going to tell Pa that you saw Elijah stealing money from the safe. You'll say that Frederick is planning to sell part of the land as soon as Pa dies. You'll destroy each of them in front of Pa." "I can't do that," I replied, trying to break free. "They're lies. Pa may be cruel, but he's not a fool." The slap came quickly and strongly, taking me by surprise. I fell to the ground, the side of my face burning. Never, in all those months of abuse, had one of them hit me like that, so directly. There was always a line they didn't cross, perhaps out of fear of Pa, perhaps out of some remnant of conscience. Harold had just crossed that line. "You'll do what I tell you," he growled, leaning over me, "or next time it won't just be a slap." At that moment, something broke inside me. It wasn't just fear, it was also the last hope that there was some humanity in that family, that there was some limit to cruelty. I looked at Harold, at his face contorted by ambition and hatred, and saw in him the reflection of our father. I saw what that sick competition was doing to all of them, transforming them into monsters worse than the one who created them. "All right," I said, my voice strangely calm. "I'll help you." He smiled, satisfied with himself, not noticing the change that had happened in me. Not noticing that it was no longer fear that I felt, but something much more dangerous. When I returned to the house that night, with my marked face and transformed soul, my mother immediately realized that something had changed. She didn't ask who had hit me. Questions like that weren't asked in that house. Instead, she took me to the small pantry where we kept the medicinal herbs, closed the door, and applied a cold compress to my face. "It's going to get worse," she whispered. "Pa is dying faster now. They'll get desperate." I looked at her. This woman who had lived under the same terror for decades, who had endured what I couldn't even imagine. "How did you bear it, Ma? All these years?" Her eyes, always lowered, met mine for a rare moment. "By bearing one day at a time. Surviving." "Surviving isn't enough," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. She studied me for a long moment, as if seeing something new in me. Then, to my surprise, she locked the pantry door and removed a loose board from the floor, revealing a small, hidden space. From there, she took a small, carved wooden box. "This belonged to my grandmother," she explained. "She gave it to me before I married your father. Said it was for emergencies, for when there was no more hope." She opened the box, revealing various dried herbs in small paper envelopes. Some I recognized from our daily work in the kitchen, others were completely strange to me. "This one," she said, showing a specific envelope with dark, dried herbs, "is hemlock. Poisonous. A small amount can cause paralysis, respiratory failure. A larger amount is fatal." I looked at my mother with new eyes. This silent, submissive woman had kept a deadly secret all these years, a last line of defense. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I saw the look in your eyes when you came in tonight. It's the same look I see in the mirror for years, the look of someone who has reached their limit." I swallowed hard. Have you thought about using it?" She closed the box slowly. "Many times, but I never had the courage. Maybe to defend myself, yes, but not to attack. I'm not like them." "And am I?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Am I like them?" My mother put the box back in its hiding place and repositioned the floorboard. "You are my daughter, but you are also his daughter. You have the strength of both sides within you." That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't sleep. My face still hurt from Harold's slap, but the physical pain was the least of my problems. In my mind, I saw the faces of my brothers, of my father. I saw my mother's hidden box. I saw the farm that had become a prison. Through the window, the full moon illuminated the fields. the same moon that had witnessed so many cruelties on that land. And as I watched it, something crystallized within me. I wouldn't be like my mother, hiding poison for decades without ever using it. Nor would I be like my brothers, destroying each other for an inheritance. I would be something completely different, something none of them expected. The next morning, I sought out Harold. He was in the barn, alone, checking the horses' harnesses. "I'm ready to help," I announced, my voice firm. He turned, surprised. He expected resistance, tears, not this direct acceptance. "What made you change your mind?" "I realized you're right," I replied, keeping my face expressionless. "Pa is dying. Soon, one of you will inherit everything. I want to be on the winner's side." Harold smiled, that cruel smile that once terrified me. Now, I felt no more fear, just a cold determination. "Smart," he said. "I always knew you had more of our family in you than it appeared." "What do you want me to do?" I asked, keeping my voice submissive even as my mind worked in a completely different direction. "First, I want you to spy on George. He's been very close to Pa lately, always in his room. I want to know what they talk about." I nodded obediently. "And then?" "Then we're going to bring down each of my brothers, one by one, and you're going to help me." I agreed again, but internally, a very different voice answered, "Yes, we'll bring down each one, but not as you imagine." That same afternoon, I sought out George. He was in the garden, the long shadow of the trees already covering the vegetable beds. Of all my brothers, he was the only one who still showed some humanity, some compassion. "George," I called softly, "can I talk to you?" He looked around, checking if we were alone. "What is it, Iris?" I showed the still visible mark on my face. "Harold, last night." His eyes filled with genuine concern. "He hit you?" "Yes, and he wants me to help destroy all of you. He wants me to lie to Pa, to spy, to sabotage." George ran his hand through his hair, clearly distressed. "This is going too far. Pa has created monsters with this competition." "I need your help," I said, my voice urgent. "I can't face them alone." He hesitated, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. Helping me meant risking his own position in the dispute for the inheritance. "Please," I insisted, "if you don't help me, who will?" It was at that moment that I saw a decision form on his face. "I'll help you, Iris, but we have to be careful. Very careful." That conversation with George was the first step in my plan. Not a plan of escape or mere survival. A plan of justice, of revenge. The final act. February arrived with intense rains that transformed the fields into muddy grounds and left the house damp and cold. My father was getting worse every day, which increased my brother's urgency to win his favor. The farm had become a minefield, where every word, every look, every gesture could trigger explosions of violence. But while they focused on destroying each other, I silently wove my web. The plan that began in that conversation with George now gained form and substance. It wouldn't be a desperate escape, nor an attempt at survival. It would be a careful demolition of everything they valued most. George became my most unlikely and valuable ally. At 28, he occupied a peculiar position in my brother's hierarchy. He wasn't the strongest like Owen, nor the smartest like Frederick, nor the most ambitious like Kenneth. But he had something none of the others possessed, my father's trust. "Pa asked me to review the account books," George told me one night, as we met hidden in the old abandoned tool shed. "I think he suspects someone is embezzling money." "And is someone?" I asked, already knowing the answer. George nodded, his serious face illuminated only by the weak light of the lantern. "Henry. He's been doing it for months, small amounts, but that add up to a considerable sum." This information was exactly what I needed. Henry, who along with Daniel managed the cattle sector of the farm, had always been one of the cruelest to me. His impossible tasks had left me exhausted and humiliated countless times. Does Pa already know it's him? No. He just knows there are discrepancies in the numbers. He asked me to investigate discreetly. I leaned forward, my voice low and urgent. And what if I helped you prove it? If we could catch Henry in the act? George hesitated. It would be risky for you. I'm at risk every day, George. At least this way I can turn the game around. The next day, I put the plan into action. I knew that Henry kept the diverted money in a can buried near the big oak tree at the back of the property. George had discovered the hiding place days before. All we needed was to make my father discover it too. It was easier than I imagined. During dinner, while serving the food, a role I had assumed since my mother fell ill with a strong flu, I accidentally dropped some coins near Henry's place. "What's that?" asked my father, his voice weak but still authoritative from the head of the table. Henry visibly paled. "Just some coins from my pocket." "So many?" questioned Frederick, always attentive to details. "Seems like too much money to be carrying in your pocket." "It's none of your business," retorted Henry, but the damage was already done. My father, even sick, never missed an opportunity to test his sons. "Henry," he called, "come to my room after dinner. I want to talk about the cattle business." That night, my father's shouts, even weak due to the disease, echoed through the house. Henry was unmasked. The evidence presented by George was irrefutable. The next morning, Henry left before dawn, expelled from the farm and disinherited. My first target had fallen. Daniel, now without his usual partner, became vulnerable. He was the weaker of the two, always following Henry instead of leading. Without his brother to protect him, he became an easy target for the others, especially for Harold, who saw in him an opportunity to demonstrate his power. During the following weeks, I observed as Harold systematically broke Daniel, humiliating him in front of the others, sabotaging his work, spreading rumors about his incompetence. I didn't need to intervene. I just had to wait and let Harold's cruelty do my work. Less than a month after Henry's departure, Daniel also fled in the middle of the night, unable to endure more humiliation. 2 targets eliminated without me having to dirty my own hands. But Harold deserved something special. The slap he gave me that day in the orchard had planted a seed of hatred that now blossomed into a meticulous plan. He was the most dangerous of my brothers, the most merciless, the one who felt genuine pleasure in causing pain. And he was also careless, impulsive. My mother, recovered from the flu, continued to teach me about herbs, now not just the medicinal ones, but also the dangerous ones. The hemlock she kept in her secret hiding place was just one of many plants with properties that could be useful. "This is belladonna," she explained one afternoon, showing a plant with purple flowers and shiny black berries at the back of the garden, hidden among the vegetables. "In small doses, it causes confusion, hallucinations. The ancients called it the witch's herb." I needed no more explanation. The next night, I added a small amount of belladonna to Harold's coffee. Not enough to kill him. I would never go to such extremes, but enough for its effects to be felt. The next day, Harold began to see things, to hear voices. He became paranoid, accusing his brothers of conspiring against him. During lunch, he had a complete breakdown, attacking Owen with a knife, convinced that he wanted to poison him. The irony didn't escape me. Owen, with his brute strength, easily subdued Harold, who was locked in his room until he regained sanity. 3 days later, when the effect of the belladonna had already passed, Harold was called to my father's room. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but Harold came out humiliated, his position in the competition severely compromised. With Henry, Daniel, and Harold weakened or out of the running, the field was more open for the others. Elijah and Gabriel, the oldest twins, now 37, intensified their rivalry. Their fights, previously contained to heated discussions, became physical, violent. It was in one of these fights that fate offered me another opportunity. The two were arguing in the barn about which planting method should be adopted for the next harvest, a trivial discussion that hid the real power struggle. Words gave way to fists, and soon they were rolling on the ground, punching each other with decades of repressed resentment. I was watching hidden when I saw the lantern fall and the oil spread, the flames quickly licking the dry straw on the floor. I could have shouted, alerted, but instead, I silently retreated into the shadows. The fire spread with frightening speed. When the others noticed and came running, it was already too late to save the barn. Elijah escaped with severe burns on his arm and face. Gabriel wasn't so lucky. He inhaled too much smoke and spent days between life and death, his recovery slow and painful. The fire was considered an accident, the result of the two's negligence. My father, even bedridden, was furious with the destruction of an important part of the property. For him, it demonstrated weakness, incompetence, unforgivable qualities in an heir. With 5 of my 12 brothers now out of the competition, the circle was closing. Kenneth, always the strategist, noticed the change in power dynamics and adapted his approach. He began to treat me better, probably realizing that I could be useful in his plans. "Iris," he called me one afternoon while I was working in the garden. "I need your help." I kept my face neutral, hiding the satisfaction of seeing that my plan was working. "With what?" "Frederick is plotting something. He's been secretly meeting someone from town. I want you to find out who and why." I pretended hesitation. "He'll hurt me if he finds out." Kenneth smiled, that calculating smile that never reached his eyes. "Not if he doesn't discover. You're smart, Iris, smarter than everyone thinks." He had no idea how right he was. In the following weeks, I fed Kenneth with carefully selected information about Frederick, some true, others fabricated. Frederick really was meeting someone from town, a young widow who had inherited neighboring lands to ours. His plan was to marry her and unite the properties, strengthening his position for succession. But the version I told Kenneth was different. In my story, Frederick was planning to sell part of the farmlands to pay secret gambling debts, using forged documents with my father's signature. Kenneth, as expected, took the information directly to my father. Frederick was confronted, vehemently denied, but the seed of doubt was already planted. My father, always suspicious, now saw betrayal where before he saw only the studious and dedicated son. Frederick realized he had been sabotaged, but didn't know by whom. He suspected Kenneth, obviously, but also Owen, Luke, even George. Never me, the invisible, the insignificant. It was during this time that George and I intensified our plan. He had access to my father's room, to his limited trust. I had access to the kitchen, to the herbs, to the secrets of the house that only a constantly ignored presence could know. "Pa won't last more than 2 weeks," George informed me in one of our secret meetings. "The doctor said his lungs are failing." "And the competition?" "He still hasn't chosen an heir. He's dissatisfied with everyone." This was perfect for my plan. My father's dissatisfaction meant he would continue to pit my brothers against each other until the end, weakening them, dividing them. The final phase of my plan involved Owen and Luke. Owen, with his brute strength and limited intelligence, was easy to manipulate. Luke, the youngest of my older brothers, now 19, had the impetuosity of youth combined with the cruelty learned from the others. I planted in Owen the idea that Luke was spreading rumors about him, questioning his courage, his virility. To Luke, I suggested that Owen was planning to harm him, to prevent him from showing his worth to Pa. The confrontation between them was inevitable and came faster than I expected. During a hunt, one of the few activities my father still valued, even though he could no longer participate, Owen and Luke separated from the group. Only one returned. Luke's body was found at the foot of a ravine, his neck broken in the fall. Owen claimed it was an accident, that Luke had slipped. Nobody openly questioned, but the looks exchanged during the improvised funeral said everything. Another Wallace eliminated from the competition, this time permanently. The guilt for what happened to Luke sometimes still haunts me. He was young, had been molded by the cruelty of our father, just like all of us. But then I remember Elijah's horse, the trap he tried to force me to participate in, and the remorse diminishes. With Luke's death, something changed on the farm. The competition, previously fierce but contained within certain limits, had now crossed a dark boundary. My father, even on his deathbed, seemed satisfied with the course of events. For him, this proved that his sons were willing to do anything for his legacy. Epilogue. It's strange to think about all this now, so many decades later, sitting here on my porch in Blue Ridge with the smell of my medicinal herbs brought by the afternoon breeze. Sometimes it seems like it was in another life, as if that frightened girl on the farm in Clayton was another person, not me. My father died in March 1960, exactly as the doctor predicted. His last days were spent observing the war he himself had created, his sons destroying each other for the chance to inherit his empire. When he finally departed, there were no real tears, just a silent relief that no one dared admit. The will was opened the following week. To everyone's surprise, my father hadn't chosen a single heir. Instead, he divided the farm into unequal parts. Kenneth received the main house and the wheat fields. Owen got the cattle, Frederick the orchards and the distillery. Matthew and Kevin, who had remained more on the sidelines of the competition, received smaller parcels of land. George got a sum of money. And me? To me, my father left what he considered the least of gifts. My maternal grandmother's small house on the outskirts of Clayton and an adjacent piece of land. For the girl, who is worth little, little is given, said the will in its cruel words. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that that small house was exactly what I wanted. Freedom. A place of my own, away from them. At 13, of course, I couldn't live alone. My mother, free from my father's yoke for the first time in decades, came to live with me. In the years that followed, I watched from a distance what happened to my brothers and the farm they fought so hard over. As I had predicted, the division of the lands was the beginning of the end. Without the unity my father valued so much, the property began fragmenting more and more. Kenneth and Owen entered into constant disputes over boundaries. Frederick sold his part and left for Atlanta. Matthew and Kevin, never prepared to manage land, went into debt and lost everything to banks. In less than a decade, the great Wallace farm, once a symbol of power and prosperity, was unrecognizable, divided and sold to strangers in ever smaller pieces. Meanwhile, in our small house, my mother and I flourished. I transformed the land into a medicinal herb garden, using the knowledge she had passed on to me. Soon, people from the region began to seek us out for natural remedies, ointments, healing teas. We gained a reputation, not for wealth or power, but for healing and wisdom. My mother lived to be 89, passing peacefully in 1994. It was almost 4 decades of a quiet life, marked not by fear, but by mutual respect and the love she could never openly express during her marriage. After her death, I decided it was time to leave Clayton behind for good. The ghosts were many, and even decades later, I would occasionally cross paths with one of my surviving brothers in town. Looks were exchanged, but words never. That's how I came to Blue Ridge in 2005. I was 58, a widow. I was briefly married in the 70s to a kind teacher who departed too soon, childless, but with a lifetime of knowledge about medicinal plants. Here, I found peace. This small mountain town welcomed me without questions about my past. I bought this house with its generous yard and recreated my herb garden. Soon I made friendships, true friendships, based on respect and affection, not on fear or power. Miss Eleanor, my first friend here, was the one who gave me the initial seedlings for the garden. She passed a few years ago, but her legacy continues in the plants that bloom each spring. There's Mr. Joseph, 82 years old, who stops by every Thursday to have coffee and bring me some new seedling he found in his walks through the fields. And Margaret, a retired nurse, who combines her medical knowledge with my herbs to help those in need. My routine today is simple and predictable, exactly as I like it. I wake up with the sun, around 6 in the morning. I have my coffee on the porch, observing the garden and the mountains in the distance. Then, I dedicate a few hours to the plants, harvesting, drying, preparing home remedies. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I open the gate for anyone who wants to come for herbs or advice. I don't charge. I never needed to. People bring what they can: fresh eggs, a homemade cake, help with some repair in the house. It's an economy of exchanges and favors that works perfectly. In the afternoon, I like to read. My small library is my pride. Books I've been collecting throughout my life, from botany to novels, from history to poetry. At night, after a light dinner, I sit again on the porch to see the starry sky of Georgia, so different from the sky of Georgia from my childhood. On weekends, I receive visits from my borrowed grandchildren, the neighborhood children who have adopted me as their grandmother. I teach them what I know about plants, tell stories, the happy ones, not the dark ones, make cinnamon cookies they love. I never returned to Clayton. I learned, through occasional letters from an old neighbor, that of my 12 brothers, only 3 are still alive. Owen, now a bitter and lonely old man. Matthew, who lost everything and lives as a charity case in his son's house. And George, the only one who built a decent life, away from our father's shadow. George and I exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, until that too stopped. I think we both prefer to leave the past where it belongs, in the past. Sometimes, when I'm in the garden and smell the damp earth after the rain, or when I see the sun setting with that specific shade of gold, I'm momentarily transported back to the farm. I no longer feel fear or anger, just a kind of melancholic peace, the understanding that I survived, that I won in my own way. That frightened girl grew up and found her path. Not through hatred or revenge, although they were necessary at the time, but through healing, of plants, of herself, and sometimes of others. Today, at 78, I have the life I chose for myself. Simple, quiet, surrounded by greenery and true friends. The legacy I built is not of land or money, but of knowledge, respect, kindness, everything that was denied to me in childhood. Closing reflections. My dear ones who have followed me to this point, I wanted to say a few words from the bottom of my heart. If you're going through a situation of cruel competition in your family, like I did, know that there is a way out, there is a different tomorrow. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. When my brothers saw me as weak because I was a woman, they were planting the seeds of their own destruction because they underestimated what I could do. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. I carried for a long time the weight of the decisions I made on that farm, of the manipulations I used to survive. But with time, I understood that that 13-year-old girl did what she needed to do to not be destroyed by a cruel system. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even when Harold hit me, when Owen intimidated me, when Frederick humiliated me, I kept within me a spark they couldn't touch. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. Dignity, my dears, is the last frontier. They can take your freedom, your comfort, even your name. But they can't take who you are inside unless you allow it. I discovered we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take any more. In that dark pantry, when my mother showed me the box with poisonous herbs, I was at my lowest point. But it was right there that I found my strength. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. I carry to this day the invisible marks of those years, but I've learned not to let them define who I am today. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. And that's what I hope you take from this conversation, that we always have a choice, even when it seems we don't. If you're in a family where there's unhealthy competition, manipulation, abuse, of whatever kind, know that you can write a different ending to your story. It may seem impossible now, but there is a path. Seek help, even if it's just one trusted person, as George was for me. Plan your exit carefully. Believe that you deserve a better life, and if you know someone in this situation, be the George to this person. Sometimes an extended hand, a word of support, can mean the difference between giving up and finding the strength to change. I thank each one of you who listened to me until here. Sharing this story wasn't easy, but I hope it has some value for those who need it. My dears, if this story touched your heart, please, right now, click subscribe and hit the bell. Each subscription isn't just a number. It's a sign that these stories of overcoming need to be heard. Stories like mine, of people who faced destructive systems and survived to tell about it. And leave in the comments the word family, so I know you watched until the end and understood how oppressive family systems can destroy lives, but also how we can overcome them. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Your participation can help this message reach those who really need to hear that there's hope on the other side of pain.